Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. I'm doing something a bit different in this video here. I'm reviewing a horror film series from Turkey, but it does have a direct connection to Asian horror, more specifically Japanese horror, because the first film in this franchise is a direct remake of a Japanese horror film. I'm talking, of course, about the 6 Dabbe films, all of which were directed by a man named Hasan Karacadag. Now, I've been a fan of this director for about a decade now, and I look forward to his films when they come out. Now, I watched these Dabbe films gradually over the past decade, but I decided to rewatch all of them a few weeks ago, and I realized that, you know what, I enjoy this franchise quite a bit. You know, there's some very good movies in here, in my opinion, and some people might be interested. You know, one of the interesting observations I've made is that some of these films are completely different from one another in multiple ways. You know, for example, there are some significant changes in style and scare tactics, which we will see as we go through them. Now, all 6 films are available on legitimate streaming sites. The first 3 films are on the official Dabbe Film YouTube channel. I believe all of them have subtitles. While the last 3 films, parts 4, 5, and 6, are on Netflix streaming in the United States. So they're all available. So let's take a look at these. And as usual, all of the films I discuss will be listed in the description box below. Dabbe, 2006 Turkish horror, of course. A remake of the Japanese ghost film Pulse that was directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Now, Dabbe involves a small group of friends who are frightened by an escalating series of suicides and ghostly hauntings. The opening is rather weird, but in a cool way. Then it continues with a replicated scene from the original film, with a small group of workers who are wondering if their friend is okay because he's been acting strange lately. You know, one of them visits his residence and, well, we know what happens then. This remake also adds a detective character into the mix who is still dealing with some disturbing events from his past. So right from the get-go, this film does some things right that the US remake got wrong. You know, first and foremost, it's glacially paced, and there's an emphasis on building an eerie atmosphere that wears the viewer down, similar to the Japanese film. There are some creepy moments in this. There are. Some of them use shadows in nice ways. Like there are a few scenes involving a spirit in the corner of a room that I think are done quite well. Sound design is a little bit more abrasive than the original film, which could rub some viewers the wrong way. You know, I thought it was generally effective. It's a mix of ambient sounds and otherworldly wailing. And they crescendo the wailing, and it gets like, you know, when these spirits wail, it's almost like it starts softly and then it gets progressively louder. But I think it worked pretty good. There's also excessive use of yellow in the sets, the lighting, and the color filters, which is visually striking. This movie just soaks itself in yellow. You know what I mean? And I actually kind of love it, because you don't see yellow used this intensely in many films. The Turkish architecture that showcased is also pretty damn cool. This is actually kind of a surprisingly beautiful film to watch. It's probably the most beautiful of this entire franchise. You know, some of the other films have a much darker lighting scheme, but this one is very nicely lit. Even during the dim indoor scenes, you know, it looks nice. The horror scenes have some integrity because they're successfully awkward, bizarre, and creepy. You know, the ghosts are freaky buggers. There are a handful of jump scares peppered in, but not enough to get annoying. Dabbe will be a bizarre viewing for fans of the Japanese film because a number of shots in this remake are exactly the same. But the filmmakers here also mix it up. You know, the message of the original film is lost, but at least this one replaces it with something else. You know, there's some good discussion regarding the themes at play, a lot of which deal with Islamic beliefs, which is pretty interesting. You know, I like the television interview near the midpoint, which is a nice discussion. You know, the Dabbe Foundation has its foundation in Islamic belief, which gives it a very different slant from most of the horror films we see in the United States. It's not something that I see often in horror films that I watch. Performances are a little bit stilted, but it works in the same way that the older Italian horror films work. You know, if you're a fan of those films, you'll be fine here. Keep in mind, though, that Dabbe it feels more like an art house film than a commercial film. kind of like Pulse did, the original Japanese film. It was a mainstream release, but it felt more art house, really, in its style. So, this one also concerns itself with atmosphere and scares more than plot or character development. Fans of odd, lower-budget ghost films may want to check this out, but some viewers may dislike its awkward vibe. It's kind of an awkward movie. The budget, from what I've read, was $150,000 United States, US dollars, to give you an idea. But I'm actually really amazed that it turned out as good as it did with a budget that freaking low. The atmosphere and visuals in this film are just money. So it should be emphasized, though, that the DVD of Dabbe has far better visual quality than the official YouTube upload of the film, which has very washed out colors. Because I started watching it on YouTube just to see what the transfer was like, and I'm like, where's all the bright yellow imagery? It was there. It was just the version they uploaded just was all washed out. So, the DVD I have has English subtitles, so I just ended up watching that again instead. If you can find one, a DVD of the first film or a better quality stream online, check it out. Like I said, within the first 10 minutes, the yellows should pop for you. So the first film, a remake of a Japanese horror film, and I liked it. And this film grows on me every time I watch it, just because, the aesthetics are so different. You know what I mean? So let's move on. I recommend it. Dabbe 2, 2009. Turkish horror, of course. After the fall of Istanbul, 5 people in a suburban home attempt to survive the looming apocalypse. So this is as close to a sequel to Dabbe as there is in this franchise. At the end of the first Dabbe film, we're left with a set of images that point to a catastrophe. The protagonists in Dabbe 2 see that catastrophe on their television set and begin to experience supernatural dangers within their own home. With Istanbul in flames and nowhere to go, really, can they survive the otherworldly threat? So the opening half hour of Dabbe 2 is pretty good. It has a crisp visual style, some effectively dreary atmosphere, and an impressive sound design. Unfortunately, this film gets worse as it progresses. The filmmakers make 2 big mistakes here. Number 1, they lessen the art house style of the original and go with a full-blown mainstream feel. And number 2, it ramps down the Japanese horror influence and ramps up the Hollywood horror influence. So how do you take a Japanese film like Pulse, successfully infuse it into your own culture with an Islamic perspective in Dabbe, only to then transform that into a commercial Hollywood-like fluff piece in Dabbe 2? All this does is kind of milk the creativity out of the concept entirely. Practically none of the interesting content or visual style of Dabbe made its way into Dabbe 2. Not a good decision by Hasan in this case. He played it way too safe with this, I think. The color scheme gets monotonous after a while and is generally lacking in interesting visuals. A lot of the film's inside the house, meaning that it's dim and gray for the most part. This takes place, like I said, in one location and almost entirely at night. The CGI effects are okay, because the ghosts have a smoky design, which kind of works with CGI, but I think it's used too much, and the scare tactics get repetitive. The characters are kind of annoying, too, with their constant screaming and whatnot. Performances are a bit shoddy, so the result is a pretty big disappointment here that's not much better than the American remake from 2006. It's not. Easily the worst film in this franchise, and the only one that you should just actively avoid at all costs. So, yeah, I do not recommend Dabbe 2. So if you've seen the American remake of Pulse from 2006, which is a pretty bad film, you might be surprised to know that there were 2 sequels to that movie, American sequels, that were both released direct-to-video in 2008. I sat through them. They're even worse than the first American remake from 2006. Now, thankfully, Hasan Karacadag, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but decided, after the second Dabbe film, he's going to take this franchise in a completely different direction with the third and future installments, and that was a great decision. That resulted in what some people consider to be the best of the entire franchise. Not a lot of people have seen these, but the few people who have really like this next installment. That's Dabbe 3, Vakasi, also known as a Jinn case. 2012. Now this is a documentary style horror film. Yes, it's shifted to documentary style. It's very different from the previous two Dabbe films, but still uses Islamic concepts and the occult to tie into the themes of those films. So the story is about a husband who videotapes his wife at night due to her propensity for sleepwalking recently. So the film actually begins with an audio recording of an interview with a doctor. And this guy explains that the female lead protagonist came to his hospital with a sleepwalking condition. Typically, she would be hospitalized for a little while because she could severely injure herself. But in this case, she wanted to stay at home and install cameras instead to monitor her sleeping behavior. So we pick up from there. The camera work and style in this film is similar in some ways to something like Paranormal Activity. But the visuals in Dabbe 3 are very crisp and colorful, which is a stark contrast to many other found footage horror films that intentionally use lower grade cameras. Sometimes the grittiness works, but I liked the crisp camera work in this case. Now this is deliberately paced, but the architecture of the house is pretty atmospheric and uniquely non-claustrophobic. Like the living room is gigantic. There's a lot of space in this house, which is very different from a lot of homes that we see in American horror films, or even Japanese horror films. Some of the Japanese films, like Ju-on, have very tight, claustrophobic living spaces, right? This is entirely different. So it's a totally different aesthetic inside the house, which is pretty cool. And the story in this film flows very naturally. Every sequence is proficiently directed, so this is a good quality film, Dabbe 3. Sound design is a little bit loud at times. It also includes a rather demonic-sounding back noise that's sufficiently unnerving. A few of the scare tactics are, pretty commonplace, cliched early on, so you need a little bit of patience with this one, but as it moves along, as it progresses, it contributes a series of truly effective horror sequences. The walk through the haunted house is quite good, the floating scene is cool, and the ending is pretty intense. Also, I typically find the religious advisor sequences to horror films to be pretty annoying and cliched, but the one here is very well executed. It's creepy, and it provides a compelling explanation for why the house is haunted. So it's got a nice little backstory here. This is a surprisingly creepy, quality film that's better than some of the more popular documentary-style horror films out there, like Paranormal Activity. This is better than every Paranormal Activity film that I've seen. I think I've seen the first 3 or 4. So if you like those films, check this one out. Even if you don't like those films, you might want to check this out. So Dabbe 3 was really the first film in this franchise that made a bit of a splash. It got a bit of traction on the internet, especially discussion boards on IMDb and stuff like that. Actually, it's probably the only one that got traction. And that is understandable because it has a conventional feel to it that makes it more attractive to general audiences. But it also has a solid overall quality that will win people over, I think. So I definitely recommend Dabbe 3, and that is Vakasi. So let's move on here. Now, this one is also a bit different. Dabbe 4, Carpmasi, also known as The Possession, 2013. A skeptic psychiatrist films a documentary and interviews an exorcist of jinns, these Islamic spiritual creatures who are causing all these problems, while he attempts to cure a patient with extreme conditions. So Kubra was possessed by a jinn on her henna night prior to her wedding when she stabbed her husband-to-be multiple times. Ebru is a psychiatrist and Kubra's childhood friend, and Ebru wants to observe Kubra for a visual phenomenon presentation and to shoot the actions taken by a so-called jinn exorcist and their results. So Ebru and a jinn exorcist known as Farouk together reach the house where Kubra and her family live, and the struggle between religion and science becomes horrifying as facts are revealed and mysteries are solved. So at 2 hours and 14 minutes long, this is the longest film of the franchise to date, but it takes its time to set everything up, and it benefits accordingly. The story and the characters are fleshed out very well in this. Arguably, the best of the entire franchise in terms of dramatic impact here. There is some good debating between the psychiatrist, who does not believe in jinns, and the exorcist, but they do form a bond in the face of these horrific events. We also learn a little bit more about the jinns that have been referenced in prior films. The ultimate explanation is intricate and interesting. They're trying to figure out what's causing this lady's problems, and the ultimate explanation is very nuanced. It's a difficult solution to crack for our protagonist, which elevates the conflict above being a mere supernatural haunting flick. You know what I mean? There's a lot of cultural and religious intricacy to it as well. It is a bit on the slow side, but everything kicks into high gear with some very cool scenes involving mirrors, as well as a crazy outhouse excavation sequence. It gets pretty intense. This director brings the themes kind of full circle. It references the first Dabbe film a little bit, and it has some interesting cult and witchcraft elements that add curiosity. There are also some effectively freaky scares along the way. Like Carpmasi, this is shot in a documentary style, or I should say like the prior film, Vakasi, it's shot in documentary style, but unlike that film, it's not modeled after Paranormal Activity. This one is more like a true documentary style investigation, with only a few static shots inside the house. So, but still, it makes a nice companion piece to the prior film because it's found footage or documentary style. Now, the viewer be warned that a few scenes do use some shaky cam and or strobe lighting, so you should be prepared for that, but it's only used occasionally. Another possible gripe for some viewers will be why the protagonists continue to film right up to the end. After a while, who cares about filming this stuff when your life is in danger, right? So we see that as a common flaw in films like this, but that is here. But overall, this fourth film in the Dabbe franchise is another very nice installment. If you care more about character and story in your horror films, this is probably a good place to start. You can watch these films in any order, really. Let's move to the next one. Dabbe 5, Zehr-i Cin, 2014. So after suffering from nightmarish visions, a woman seeks help from a spiritualist. Dilek, a housewife, suddenly starts to feel the presence of something abnormal in her house, and the situation becomes worse. She and her husband find out that an ancient paranormal creature called a Jinn has cursed her. They seek out a way to cure her, but along the way they discover some shocking historical events. So similar to the last two films, this begins with a creepy interview or voiceover, while newspaper clippings are being shown. It makes it feel like it's based off of something real, which is pretty creepy, right? The story is not quite as good here as the last film. It feels like a less interesting version of Carpmasi, and that's basically what it is. It's good, but not as good. Same with the characters. Most interestingly, though, the documentary style is basically non-existent in this installment. So you switch back more to a conventional, camera work and filmmaking style here. A few cameras are installed in the house of our protagonist, but the footage isn't shown much. So again, we see this director kind of changing things up a bit with each installment of this franchise as he moves along. This film is nicely shot. Excuse me. With a lot of creepy imagery, occult-themed rituals, hypnosis, standing corpses. Some pretty cool stuff in this. This is loaded with some horror imagery that drives its entertainment value. Some flash editing is occasionally used, and this is, fortunately, one of the few examples where it works. I can't think of many movies where that works. Mostly because the horror relies heavily on nightmarish visuals here. There's a scene early on that involves a bloody stabbing death. Uses some flash editing in it, and some loudness, which are things that I'm not really a fan of, right? But it somehow works, and you can still comprehend what's happening. Then it lingers on this bloody corpse for a little bit, and then it transitions directly into a witchcraft ceremony involving a shrouded corpse. So it's pretty creepy stuff. You know what I mean? Things get intense, and overall the scares are satisfying here. Performances are good, which is another positive. Some small sections of this film do have some Western horror cliches, like American cliches. Like, the husband at first refuses to believe that anything supernatural is going on. That's something we typically see. There are some jump scares used as well. But it does not rely on those things. In other words, the good outweighs the bad here. So in a nutshell, Zehr-i Cin is not as good as the best installments of the Dabbe franchise, but it's a lot better than Dabbe 2. So it's not one to avoid. I recommend it. Just not as highly as some of the other ones. So we've reached the final installment here. And although some additional installments are in the pipeline for future release, I know Dabbe 7 is in pre-production right now. Dabbe 6, 2015. Alright. A series of weird and terrible events happen to a young girl and her family after she witnesses her mother's death by supernatural forces. Summoning a doctor who has a similar experience with another girl, he unravels clandestine and awful incidents leading to unexpected outcomes. The girl's older sister is actually the lead character here. This begins with a rather beautiful opening sequence that transitions to a lengthy spellcasting ritual involving animal carcasses. So it definitely sets the tone, because this is the nastiest and most visceral installment of the entire franchise. It gets a bit crazy in this one. So the story here is good, and gets more interesting as it moves along. Direction is top-notch in terms of camera work. The acting is solid, too. I really like the lead actress as well as the supporting actress. I think they both did a very good job. The epic 2-hour and 33-minute runtime for a horror film allows for 3 different horror films in one in this. There's actually a good number of jump scares and dream scene fake-outs during the opening hour. Again, I got no excuses here, people. I'm just telling you the truth. These are all big no-nos for me. You know how much I don't like jump scares. And I don't like dream scene fake-outs either. But somehow, in this movie, they work. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Every single one of these scares, and this might be the reason, every single one of these scares includes some extremely visceral, nightmarish, demonic imagery and violence with some nasty-looking demons. So regardless if it's a jump scare or a kind of a dream scene fake out, just the imagery I'm seeing is just really cool. You know what I mean? It's cool stuff. One sequence involves consecutive fake outs in a row, which is a total no-no for me. But I found it entertaining in its excessiveness and creativity. The way it plays out is very different in how it's typically used in other horror films. So, I don't know what to tell you. I liked the jump scares and the dream scene fake outs in this movie. I do. So after that, Dabbe 6 transitions to a demon possession mystery film as the second type of film out of the 3, right? With specific cultural and Islamic concepts. One interesting aspect that emerges is the possibility that the girl developed a second hellish personality that has escaped her body and can torment others or something like that. There's some cool scenes in this. Then the final third is a documentary-style found footage horror film again. So he blends it into the third part of this film. And it also blends in some third-person camera work in with it. So, yeah, this movie is pretty crazy. The thing about the Dabbe films is that, some of them are loaded to the brim with horror content like this one. But the imagery itself feels kind of wild, even somewhat random and demonic. The horror imagery in this one is fantastic and diverse. While I do think there are a few too many jump scares, the movie still gave me kind of the heebie-jeebies. Dabbe 6 is like the roller coaster ride of this franchise. There are some slow sections during the second half that probably could have been cut down a bit, like the side plot involving the handicapped guy being one example. But it finishes strong and is highly satisfying stuff. So, again, the film is memorable and distinguishable from the prior installments. You got to give Hasan Karacadag some props for that. He was not content with simply doing the same exact thing in every film. So needless to say, I enjoyed Dabbe 6 quite a bit, and I recommend it. So in summary, and to be perfectly honest, I'm kind of amazed that I like these films as much as I do, because some of the aesthetics and scare tactics usually aren't the type of things that I like. But, I'm not sure how other people will react to these. There have been some people who have seen them, but not enough to draw, like, a conclusion as to what the public would think of films like this. I mean, fans of documentary-style horror might really dig Dabbe 3, Beers and Vakasi. But, like, the first Dabbe film is, like, a visually driven art house-style film that's kind of awkward that I really enjoy. I don't know if most people are going to like that. Or even Dabbe 6 might be a little bit too wild for the average moviegoer. It might be a bit too wild and odd. You know what I mean? But still, if you're in the mood for something a bit different, use my reviews in this video as kind of an idea, a bit of a guide to pick which installments you might be interested in. Check a few of these out. I'd be interested in hearing your opinions on these. You know what I mean? I don't know if people will come back and say, oh, it's just too much flash imagery or too much jump scares or too much, it's all over the place or whatever. But, yeah. I like this franchise, and I look forward to Dabbe 7 if it ever gets made, and a few of the director's other films I might cover at some point on this channel as well, because he's made some other good stuff. So, let me know what you think. As always, I'll see you next time.